middle of the night. And I struggle with my pain, wrestle with my pride. Sometimes I feel alone and I cry. And in this life, I know what I've been, but here in your arms, I know what I am. I'm forgiven, I'm forgiven. And I don't have to carry the weight of who I've been, 'cause I'm forgiven. When I don't fit in and I don't feel like I belong anywhere, when I don't measure up to much in this life, oh, I'm a treasure in the arms of Christ. 'Cause I'm forgiven, well, I'm forgiven. I don't have to carry the weight of who I've been, 'cause I'm If I sing but don't have love, I waste my breath with every song I bring. An empty voice, a hollow noise. If I speak with a silver tongue, convince a crowd but don't have love, I leave a bitter taste with every word I say. So let my life be the proof of your love. Let my love look like you and what you're made of. How you lived, how you died, love is sacrifice. So let my life be the proof of your love. If I give to a needy soul but don't have love, then who is poor? It seems all the poverty is found in me. So let my life be the proof of your love. Let my love look like you and what you're made of. How you lived, how you died, love is sacrifice. So let my life be the proof of your love. When it's all said and done, but you were just too weak. So you lost all the things you tried to keep. Now you're on your knees. You're on your knees. But wait, yeah, everything can change in a moment's time. You don't have to be afraid, 'cause fear is just a lie. Open up your eyes, and He'll break open the skies to save those who cry out His name. The one the wind and waves obey is strong enough to save you. Look, now is not too late. Lift up your head, let the rain fall on your face. You're not far from grace. You're not too far from grace. And He'll break open the skies to save those who cry out His name. The one the wind and waves obey is strong enough to save you. Break open the skies to save those who cry out His name. The one the wind and waves obey is strong enough to save you. I know the weight of this world can take you down like gravity. Yeah, I know the current of yourself can take you out to sea. But hold on, hold on. And He'll break open the skies to save those who cry out His name. The one the wind and waves obey is strong enough to save you. Break open the skies to save those who cry out His name. The one the wind and waves obey is strong enough to save you. storm comes, I am washed by the water. Even when the rain falls, even when the flood starts rising, even when the storm comes, I am washed by the water. Even when the rain falls, even when the flood starts rising, even when the storm comes, I am the name of Jesus.
Hey everyone, I want to welcome you today to our online life group. Thank you so much for watching. We are getting ready to talk about the reliability of the scriptures. Can they be trusted? That's what we're talking about in the second part of our series on apologetics. A lot of skeptics believe that we cannot believe in the reliability of the scriptures, so we'll discuss that today. At this very moment, you're looking at the class, and they are talking about a question I've asked them. I've asked them to talk about on one side of the room is talking about the most powerful person they've ever known, and the other side of the room talking about the most loving person they ever known. That will come up in just a couple of minutes in class, and you will understand what that's all about in just a couple of minutes. But you can think about that also as we get ready to discuss the reliability of the scriptures. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you have a prayer request or an announcement, you can let us know in the box below the screen right there. Thanks again for watching. Brother Danny's the Superman guy.
I don't mean we can jump over a building.
But ours wouldn't be one hour. Ours is kind of...
How about Paul Newman?
Oh! That's pretty good.
Smitty said,
All right. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. Now we'll get to our discussion question in just a moment, but we're going to talk about today the reliability of the scriptures. Can we trust that the scriptures are true? A lot of skeptics will tell you the Bible is just a bunch of myths. And if the Bible is a bunch of myths, we have no reason to be here this morning. So we really need to dig into that issue. This is going to be a bit of a complicated issue, but I think it's one we can all get our arms around and understand eventually. Y'all just going to have to hang with me this morning, okay? Let's start with this. C.S. Lewis said something I think will jump us into our time here and be very important. He famously said this. He said, "A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with the man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit him out and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with this patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to." So the basic idea, this statement has been dubbed the Lewis trilemma. In other words, Jesus is either a liar, he's a lunatic, or he's Lord. And it's a very good trilemma, I think. It gives you those three options. Lewis says those are the only three options, all right? But over the years, some skeptics have come up with a fourth option. Can y'all see the one little hole in Lewis's argument here? Anybody?
Crazy liar.
Well, that's one of the options. He could be a liar. They just made it up. That's the other option that Lewis didn't bring up. Lewis was talking to a group of people who he believed assumed that the scriptures were basically reliable. But since that time, we've come up with we've seen a much larger group have come forward who says we don't believe that the scriptures are actually true. So they've added a fourth option. Jesus is either a liar, a lunatic, a legend, or Lord. So the question we want to examine today is whether or not the stories of Jesus, the stories that we find in the Bible, are actually legends instead of actual truth. So that's the real question we're going to dig into. So what I want us to do I want us to begin in the Gospels, because if we can establish a general reliability for the Gospels, then we can branch out and believe the rest of the Bible is true. If I can establish that Matthew, Mark, and Luke specifically are reliable, then what we have to say when we read those is, well then, Jesus was who he said he was. We have to get to, we find ourselves in Lewis's trilemma, liar, lunatic, or Lord, okay? And if the Gospels are true, nobody really reads Jesus and thinks he's a liar. Nobody really reads Jesus and thinks that guy was just crazy, okay? So the only real option is he's Lord. And if Jesus is Lord, Jesus trusted the Old Testament. He believed the Old Testament was reliable. So we've got the Gospels in the Old Testament. And if the stories of Jesus are true, they perfectly explain what happened in the early church. So we find reliability in Paul's letters and the rest of the New Testament. So that's what we're going to try to do today, is establish that we can trust the accounts that we find of Jesus in the Gospels. And if we can do that, I believe we can have a solid foundation for the truths of the Scriptures, okay? So we're going to be in Luke chapter 1 is where we're going to begin today. Luke chapter 1, the first couple of verses are probably the kinds of things that you have skipped over as you read, because they're not really much about Jesus and they're kind of an introduction. But Luke makes some pretty astounding claims in Luke chapter 1. And so when we look at the claims that Luke makes, we have to ask ourselves, can these claims possibly be true? Are these claims true? Now, some of the things that Luke says is going to take us down into some paths that are going to be a little bit complicated. So I want y'all to hang in with me, though. I'm going to try to keep it as 101 as possible. The other thing is, let me think of a good way to put this. If you were riding a horse and the saddle slipped and you fell off the horse, did that make your horse unreliable? What was unreliable? The saddle, or the person who put the saddle on, right? Okay? So, what I'm telling you is we may have to tear down some preconceptions you have about the Bible before we can build a better foundation for you, okay? So, some of the things I may say today, you may find initially a little shocking. I hope not. Maybe you won't. But I just want you to bear with me, because we're building a better foundation than what you have. Had a discussion with my children yesterday, because they seem to always be a good gauge of what kids think anyway. I asked them, how do you think the people who wrote the Bible knew what to write? And they said, well, God told them. I said, okay, how did he do that? And so we got into that discussion. And so that's what I want you to be thinking about. How did those people who wrote the books of the Bible know what to write? It's a simple question, okay? When we get into Luke, we're going to find some answers. Luke chapter 1 gives us some answers as to exactly where Luke found the stuff to write these stories about Jesus. So somebody read verses 1 through 3 for me.
For as much as many have taken in hand to set forth in order a declaration of those things which are most surely believed among us, even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, it seemed good to me also, having that perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus.
Okay. Luke makes some claims right here, and I want us to examine the claims that Luke is making, because if we can understand what Luke is saying in those first 3 verses of his book about how he came to know these stories and how he came to write these stories about Jesus down, we'll begin to develop a true and good foundation of what the Scriptures, of the truth of the Scriptures, okay? So I want you to notice, first of all, in verse 1, notice what he says, inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us. So what does that tell us about the stories of Jesus? People were writing them down. And how many people were writing them down according to Luke? Many people were writing them down, okay? Now, let's back up a minute. We believe Luke was probably the third of the Gospels to be written, okay? And I think a good case can be made that Luke was written about 30 years after Jesus died, maybe even less than 30 years after Jesus died. Let's just back up for a second. Y'all know the other book that Luke wrote, right? Acts. He also wrote Acts. Do y'all know how Acts ends? Anybody remember how Acts ends? No, it's not Stephen. Paul's on trial, or Paul's in jail at the time, okay? It's kind of a weird way for a book to end. With the main character of the book, we don't know what happened to him. Don't you think? So why would someone end a book that way, do you think?
It's the last he heard.
Yeah, he didn't know anything else, all right? Paul's still in jail when he finishes the book. Now, we know Paul died about AD 62, so that's about 29, 30 years after Jesus. He was executed by Nero. About 62 is the best guess. So, if that's the case, then Acts had to be written when? Before that, all right? So, if Acts was written before that, when was Luke written? Before Acts, okay? So this backs us up into probably the late 50s. Luke was the third of the Gospels written, okay? So, if Luke was the third of the Gospels written, when were Matthew and Mark written? Before Luke, all right? So this backs us up even further. What we're finding is that the Gospels are written within 20 years of the death of Jesus, all right? All right, so that's the first thing I want you to see, but wait, there's more, all right? There are many things in the book of Luke and the book of Matthew that are almost exactly alike, all right? So word for word. Now, teachers in here, say you had people in your class write a report on Thomas Edison, and you get to one paragraph and 3 of them have written the exact same words. I mean, exactly the same words, word for word. What are you probably going to think? They cheated. How did they cheat? They either worked together or they copied out of Wikipedia or something, right? All right. Now, so the same principle holds true. If I find the exact same wording, not just a quote, but the exact same wording in Matthew and Luke, what is the likely story? They use somebody else as a reference, okay? So, what we're saying here is that Luke is written in the late 50s, Matthew written before that, Mark even before that, but we find a lot of stuff in common between Matthew and Luke that's not in Mark. So Mark couldn't have been the source of it. So there must have been some other source that somebody had written down, right? Doesn't that make sense? Okay, scholars call this source Q. We've never found Q. As far as we know, there's not a copy of Q in existence. Q stands for kel, which is just a Greek word for source. So scholars believe that there's another source that Luke and Matthew used to write their stories. All right? And okay, so Luke is written in the late 50s. Matthew is written when? Before that, right? And so if Luke and Matthew, let's back Matthew up to, the early 50s. Okay? But Matthew had some other source he was using. All right? So when would that have had been written? Before Matthew, okay? So we have backed up these stories of Jesus all the way to within a decade, 15 years of when Jesus actually walked and lived on the earth and died. Now, where do you think they got the stories that they wrote down from?
Eyewitnesses.
Yeah, people were telling them, all right? So, if they wrote down these stories that people were telling them, when were people telling them?
All the time, years and years after that.
Before they wrote them down, right? So how far have we backed up these stories to now? Yeah, we've backed them all the way up to the mid-30s probably. We've backed them all the way up to just after the resurrection of Jesus. So what we find, and this is going to help us base the reliability of the Scriptures, is that these stories were not some legendary developments that came up years and years and years after they were written. These are stories that came up immediately. They started telling them immediately, all right? And so when Luke finally writes it down 30 years later, he's just writing down the stuff that people have been talking about for 30 years already, all right? Now, let's back up a second. I ask you the same question that I asked my children. How did, what is the process of writing down Scripture? What do you think that was like? Did Luke go into a trance, like this Holy Spirit trance where it's just like, and the letters just started coming out? What did that look like, you think?
I think he had lots of sticky notes.
Papyrus sticky notes, right? Yes. Okay. Anybody else?
So he was like a reporter. He was going around asking people, trying to figure out what was true.
That's exactly what we see. And notice what he says in verse 2. He says, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to whom? To whom? To us. In other words, Luke got these stories from whom? The people who saw them. Luke didn't actually know Jesus, but he knew the people who knew Jesus. All right? So he got these stories from the people who actually witnessed them. All right? And Luke, what we're going to find from Luke, and this is amazing. We don't have time to get into this deeply. But what we're going to find from Luke is that Luke is an incredible historian. All right? Luke may be the ancient world's best historian. And that's not something that just biblical scholars will tell you. That's something that that non-biblical and secular scholars will often tell you. Luke gets the little details right again and again and again. And sometimes scholars have thought, well, Luke missed this one, and later stuff came up and showed that, no, Luke was right and we were wrong here. So again and again and again, Luke gets the little things right. He's a meticulous historian. He's a journalist. All right? We see that Luke talked to people. He compiled those old stories that have been written down somewhere else. He interviewed people. I think Luke probably interviewed Mary. All right, Luke traveled with Paul, so he got to know all the people who were involved and who were happening. Got to know the apostles. He was in Jerusalem, and you see these birth narratives in Luke that nobody else has, and I think it's specifically because he probably talked to Mary himself about what happened. And so Luke gets the little details right, though, when it comes to geography, when it comes to historical fact, and that stuff, leaving aside the things he says about Jesus. Luke gets all these little details right all through the book of Luke and all through Acts. So the first thing I want us to see about the book of Luke, it was not the first, all right? It was relatively early, but many had come before him, and the stuff that he wrote down was stuff that had come much earlier. And secondly, Luke is very meticulous. He wants to get the facts right. He wants to get the details right. He makes sure to get those details right. And we can show that on the little geographical and historical details that he got them right. And so if he got those right, we can have more confidence that he got the things about Jesus right too, because this was really important for him to get his facts straight. Okay? And compare this to other ancient documents. If you read stories of Muhammad or people like that, A, they were written centuries after him, and B, they do not have the facts straight like these do, okay? So that's the good news we can hear when we hear about Luke. And here's the better news. People will tell you sometimes that the Gospels have all these inconsistencies, all right? They don't, all right? Luke, Matthew, and Mark specifically, we can make everything work perfectly, all right? They fit together. Now, let me ask you this. Again, let's go back to this. If Matthew, Mark, and Luke had been exactly the same, word for word, what would we think? Yeah, just one person, or they copied. But because we find little details that are different in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what can we take from that? Yeah, they came from different people. They were authentic. You know, if Smitty and I went out to, we're standing out in front of the church this morning, and two cars crashed. And Smitty and I got separated, and the police came and asked us both what happened. Would our stories match word for word? But would they both probably be accurate? Yes. Right. We just saw different little details. Smitty noticed that the driver of the one car was on his phone, you know, and I didn't see that. But I saw that the driver of the other car look down to grab something at the last second. You know, we notice different things, and this is what we should expect from the gospel writers also. They notice different things, and so they write down different things. If Brandy and I write a report on the same book, they're not going to be exactly the same. We're going to notice different things. Different things are going to stand out to us. We're going to have different purposes sometimes too, and so the gospel writers had different things they wanted to bring out. And so the gospels fit together nicely. All right, next question. Where can we find the original copy of Luke? Where could you go and read that? Yeah. The one that Luke, the papyrus scroll that Luke wrote on, where can we find that? Anybody? No, we do not have. Yeah, we do not have the original scroll that Luke wrote, or whatever Luke wrote on. You know, his sticky notes. We don't have those either. And nor do we have the originals of any of the books of the Bible. Should that bother us? Why not?
We feel it.
Okay.
I mean, we have so many ancient manuscripts to compare off of.
This is key, and I want to sit on this for just a minute. And we can't. Again, this is not something we can go into great detail about, but I want you to have just a basic understanding of this. We don't have the originals, but what we have is literally thousands of ancient copies. When I say thousands, I'm being as literal as possible. Probably tens of thousands is a better way to describe what we have. And when I say ancient copies, I mean copies that go back, 15, 16, 1700 years. We have all these copies. And here's the cool thing about those copies. They're almost all the same. They're almost completely identical. You'll find differences. Now, has anybody ever heard of Bart Ehrman? I didn't figure some of you may have. Bart Ehrman is a skeptic, used to be a Baptist preacher, and now he's a New Testament scholar who doesn't believe any of it, doesn't buy it. All right? I mean, he believes Jesus existed, but nothing like the Jesus that we find in the Gospels. And Bart Ehrman says over and over again, there are thousands of inconsistencies in these ancient manuscripts, and there are thousands of mistakes in these ancient manuscripts, and they don't match up. And that's just not true, okay? What we find is when there's a mistake, it's a misspelled word. All right? 98% of the mistakes that we find in these ancient manuscripts are misspelled words or words that have been switched around accidentally, or something on the level of forgetting to cross your T. I mean, that's what almost all of these are. The thing that you would be amazed by if you read, I could give you an ancient manuscript that was found that's 1,600 years old from Israel. And I could also give you an ancient manuscript that is 1,400 years old from Egypt. And they could both be of the book of Isaiah, let's just say. What you would find in those books, you would say, wow, these are almost exactly alike. And you would be amazed by that, okay? So the only thing that you would find that might be a little different is somebody might have misspelled a word or two. And what does that tell us about the reliability of the Scriptures then? About the people who copied these Scriptures. We didn't have copying machines back there. You know how they were copied, right? By hand, all right? So what does that tell us about the reliability? About the people who wrote them?
And normal people. They weren't scholars that knew how to write correctly.
Okay.
A lot of times.
Well, actually, a lot of them were scholars.
But some of them
Right.
weren't.
The main thing is, I mean, yes, we see a misspelling here or there, but I mean, the main thing you're going to see is that they're so much alike. These people were meticulous about making sure they got the little things right.
But when I think about it, sometimes like the Bibles, one is a little bit more harder for me to understand the next one and the next one. So I think when they get transferred from place to place, they turn them around to words that their people can understand.
Okay, and that's what we find in the translations. Now, in these ancient manuscripts, what we find is they're almost word for word exactly the same. The differences that we find are just little mistakes and small mistakes at that, misspellings, like I said, things like that. Okay, so that's what we find. Okay, all right. Now, one more claim I want to notice of what. By the way, y'all just got a little lesson in what's called source criticism, where we look at the sources of, so if anybody ever asks if you studied any source criticism, you can say, yes, I have. That's neither here nor there. That's what scholars do right there. Okay, there's one final thing I want us to notice from Luke, and that's in verse 3. It's going to propel us into our original discussion this morning. Notice what Luke says. Verse 3, what does he say he's done and plans to do in the writing of this gospel? He's carefully investigated. Right, we talked about that. What else?
Perfect understanding.
I'm sorry. And writing an orderly account. What do you think his point is there to write an orderly account?
To make sure it's right. Make
Yeah. Luke's claim is that I've been following this stuff for years. Me and Paul have been hanging out, and I've heard all the stories. I've talked to all the people who were involved, down to maybe even Mom, even talking to her. I've investigated all of this, and what I've done here, what I'm doing in this book, is writing an orderly account, telling you the things that actually happen. Not going into, this is not mythology. This is what actually happened. This is an orderly account so that you can be certain about the things that actually happen. All right? So Luke is making some audacious claims right here. He's saying, these are the facts. These are what happened. Okay? There are no mistakes, is what he's saying. And as we as Southern Baptists, we believe the Bible is inerrant, has no mistakes, but it is even more than that. It is authoritative, and it's perfect in every way. Okay? And that's what we find in Luke. Luke says, that's the claims I'm making here, okay? That this, what I've given you, is a true and orderly account of the things that have happened, okay? That's the claim he's making. Now we need to decide if that claim is actually true. And I think we've given some pretty good evidence to see why those claims might be true, right? We've said that Luke is a meticulous historian, that Luke talked to the right people, that Luke gets his facts right on the little things, geographically, historically, things like that, politically, he gets the little things right. Again and again and again, we find all these things to be true about Luke. But here's where I want to take a step further, and I want to get into our original discussion. I want us to try to figure out how these things could have come to be written down and they not be true. Does that make sense? If these things are not true, how do we find them in the form they currently are, okay? So that's where I want to get to our original discussion. This side of the room, I ask you to say what, to look at what? I'm sorry, you all talked at once. Okay, let's start here. Most powerful person you've ever heard of. Okay, the question was most powerful person, either fictional or historical, that you can think of outside of the Bible. What are some of the people we came up with here? Superman. Absolutely. Superman is right at the top of the list. Iron Man's pretty tough himself, yeah. Hitler's a great example of it, yeah. Okay. Others? The Pope. Pope, very powerful, yes, no doubt. Okay? Anybody else? Okay, well, let's flip it over here. Most other-centered, most loving people, either historical or fictional, that you can think of. What are some of the people we came up with?
Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Superman.
Superman. Now, it's really interesting. I want you to keep in mind that Superman is on both these lists. We'll get back to that in just a minute. Anybody else? We can't, outside of the Bible. Mother Teresa. Santa Claus, okay? You said Smitty? You want him to rub your feet today, don't you?
It was the first one that came.
Hey, we did have one earlier, Kimmy, who just passed.
Yeah, she's a great example. Yeah. So what do we notice about these two lists? How much overlap do we see between these two lists? Yeah, just the one, Superman, who again, we'll get back to Superman in just a minute. So I have a Superman shirt. I like Superman, so that's cool. But we'll get back. What we notice is that if you are really powerful, chances are you're not very what? Nice, right? Voltaire, I think it was, who said that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts how? Absolutely. So the more power you have, the more likely you are to be evil, right? It's really that simple. Okay, now let's open up this discussion to the Bible. Can we find someone who fits the description of incredibly powerful and incredibly other-centered? And who would that be? Jesus. All right, now let's go back to Superman. Superman is a Jesus figure. All right, look up Google Jesus and Superman, and you'll find that Superman is in many ways a messianic figure, okay? Kind of based on Jesus, even though the creators of Superman were Jewish. It's neither here nor there. He has a very messianic I know too much about Superman, I realize. But, he's a very messianic figure in many ways. But let's think about this for a minute. Compare Jesus to Superman. Who's the most powerful?
Jesus.
All right, we've got Superman who, if he gets near kryptonite, all right, and we've got Jesus who, if he gets in a storm, calms it. Right? So, I mean, does it really compare? Right? We have Superman who came from another earth. We have Jesus who, in John 1, what?
Always existed.
Always existed and did what? Created the earth. So, is there really any comparison between the power of Jesus and Superman? Okay, let's turn to other-centeredness. There was a story about, again, I know too much about Superman, but there was a story about Superman dying in the comic books, right? And being resurrected. So somebody came up with this idea. Who do you think they based that on?
Jesus.
They came from Jesus. I mean, dying and being resurrected, of course that came from Jesus, okay? All right, other-centeredness. Was there ever a time when you think Superman might have used his powers for his own good? Of course he did, right? To get to work on time. You know? when you're Superman and you work at the Daily Planet and have to be there at 8 and you're in Cancun, you know, helping people from a tsunami. I don't know if they have tsunamis in Cancun, but that's neither here nor there. You might have to use your powers to make sure you get to the planet on time. Okay, did Jesus ever use his powers for himself? No, Jesus was the most other-centered person in the history of the world, fictional or otherwise, all right? That's the point that we're making right here. We've never seen anyone, fictional, non-fictional, historical, non-historical, like Jesus. And anyone who has come after any character that comes close who's come after Jesus, I've heard somebody bring up Aslan from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as somebody who was very powerful and also very loving. But who is Aslan? Yeah, Aslan's Jesus, all right? He's based on Jesus. So, historical, non-historical, fiction, non-fiction, it is impossible to find someone like Jesus anywhere that's not actually based on Jesus, who has the power and the love, the other-centeredness of Jesus. So the first thing I want you to understand is these stories are simply too good not to be true. All right? I mean, the idea that somebody could make these kinds of stories up just seems crazy to me. That's not enough, but I just wanted you to get that emotional fact in your head first. These stories are simply too good not to be true. But the second thing is this. We've established how early these stories started being written down, right? I mean, we're talking, 10, 15 years of Jesus' death, they began to actually write the stories down. Who was alive within 10 to 15 years of Jesus' death? Yeah, they were almost all of the eyewitnesses were alive. Paul says that in 1 Corinthians 15. He says, there are hundreds of witnesses to his resurrection. Go and ask them about it. And we'll get into more about that when we talk about the resurrection and how that's one of the firm proofs of Christianity. But he said, go and ask them about it. So there are these hundreds of people who were alive to witness the resurrection, literally thousands of people who saw the things that Jesus said and heard the things that Jesus said and saw the things that Jesus did. So, if someone is going to make these stories up and begin to write them down, let me ask you this. Let me back up for a second. You ever played the telephone game? Do you know what I'm talking about, the telephone game? Where I whisper something in Rob's ear, and he whispers it in Lori's ear, and we go all the way around the room, and then it comes back to Jalissa, and what does it sound like when Jalissa finally gets to it? It sounds nothing like what it started with, right? Could that have been what happened here?
No, because there's so many copies that if somebody tried to monkey with the text, they had to change all of them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's so many different tellings of the story that are all so similar. All right, so it can't be a mistake. All right, these stories didn't just come up by mistake, and really it wasn't long enough for legends to develop. Legends develop over centuries, not years. All right, so if a legend is going to develop, when you hear legends of Alexander the Great or something, these stories are hundreds of years after Alexander died that they came up. So you hear legends about Julius Caesar; those stories were written 500 years after Julius Caesar lived. But these stories were written within years. Were you say?
Was as they develop, they start omitting the details.
Yeah,
And that's something that you don't see in Scripture.
that's a great point. Also, again, we talked about Luke. He was meticulous with the details. But if you're going to write a legend, you have to leave out some of the details because it won't fit right with what you're talking about. So, if they weren't legends, if they weren't mistakes, if these stories aren't true, what must they have been? Lies. Okay? That's what they have to be. That's the only option. Okay? The only option is that all the folks gathered together and conspired to tell a bunch of lies. Could that possibly be what we find in the Gospels? Why not?
Because it's all true.
Okay? They all died. Yeah, they died for a lie. That's a great point. Every single one of them either died or John was thrown off on the island of Patmos for a lie. Okay? What else? So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
They all didn't know each other either. I mean, I'm sure there are so many different people that are telling the same thing, but they all, obviously, they don't know each other. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, listen, here's the thing about conspiracy theorists. Have you ever tried to keep a secret for more than a day? How long did it last? How long? Your best secrets, how long do they last? This is why every time I hear a conspiracy theory, I say no. All right? Because too many people have to be involved, and when people get involved in a conspiracy, what eventually happens? Yeah, the truth comes out. It falls apart because nobody can keep their mouth shut. All right? And so if they'd all conspired to make this into a big lie, eventually somebody's going to be like, man, this was great while it lasted and it was fun, but instead of getting my head chopped off, I'm going to just tell you the true story. All right? Somebody would have eventually done that, okay? So I'm just trying to pile evidence up here, okay, to help us understand why these stories must be reliable. But the final thing I want us to understand about saying that these apostles were simply liars is that if they were lying about who Jesus is, where did they get it from? Okay? So you're telling me they're big old liars, but they also came up with the greatest moral story that's ever been told in the history of the world. They're moral monsters, but they're also huge liars. They're moral monsters, but they've also come up with the greatest morality that's ever been written down. How can this possibly be true? It can't. That's the point, okay? It just cannot be true. The inescapable conclusion, and when I say inescapable, I don't mean it to the point that if 100% of the people are going to believe it, but the inescapable conclusion about these stories about Jesus has to be true. They're true. That's the only real explanation for it. And those who come up with ways to explain it away are beginning with presuppositions that they don't want to believe it in the first place. Remember what we said yesterday, all who truly seek will find. And those who don't find, we're not truly seeking. And we're looking for reasons. And I say this from the point of somebody who used to want to find reasons not to believe it. All right, a former skeptic who thought it would be much easier just to leave this stuff behind and do what I wanted to do. And I just couldn't do it. All right, trying to explain away these stories, it's darn near impossible. I mean, I guess you can if you want to badly enough, but an honest look at these stories has to tell us that they must be true. And if these stories are true about Jesus, again, they tell us that he was the most powerful person to ever walk the planet. All right? And they also tell us he was the most loving, other-centered person to walk the planet. And so that must also tell us that he was what? He was God in the flesh. All right? That's what he has to be. It is the inescapable conclusion of these stories. He is God in the flesh. And if he is God in the flesh, he affirmed the Old Testament. So what does that mean about the Old Testament?
It's true.
It's true. And if he is God in the flesh, it explains what happened in the book of Acts. Right? So what does that tell us about the book of Acts?
It's true.
It's true. And if he is God in the flesh. It explains all these letters that Paul wrote and all the things that the apostles wrote. And so what does that tell us about those things? They're true. I mean, and we could find skeptics who could pick apart the argument I just made, because we have 45 minutes. Okay, so there, but there are answers to those arguments, and I want you to be confident that the things that we have and the things that we're reading here are true, and we can believe them with all our hearts. And so, if we have managed to remove legend from going back to the very beginning of our lesson today, we've managed to remove legend from Lewis's trilemma. What are our other options about Jesus?
This option.
Well, what are the three options that we talked about? He is a liar, he's a lunatic, or he's Lord. Could he possibly be a liar with everything that we've seen? No. Does anything Jesus ever did or said make him look like someone who would just be crazy? No, nothing about the Gospels paint Jesus to be crazy in any sense of the word. Now, there have been times